Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Let me tell you, we have a new star. A star is born, Elon.
Pumped up on Mars juice and ketamine.
He is the Thomas Edison plus of our age.
Probably his whole life is from a position of insecurity. I feel for the guy.
I would say 98% really appreciate what he does, but those 2% that are nasty, they are out there in full force.
We are meant for great things in the United States of America, and Elon reminds us of that.
We don't have a fourth branch of government called Elon Musk.
Welcome to Elon Inc., Bloomberg's weekly podcast about Elon Musk. It's Tuesday, April 15th. I'm your host, Joel Weber, sitting in for David Papadopoulos. It's tax day in the U.S., when the federal government is supposed to collect its money, and maybe it still can, but of course, the IRS has been gutted, alongside many other federal agencies, thanks to Elon and Doge. But the news stories about Doge seem to have been slowing down a little bit. What exactly is Elon and his young team up to these days? We've got lots to discuss. So we'll talk about that, and then we're going to dig back into the roller coaster of Tesla's share price as investors await next week's earnings call. Okay, let's start with Doge. And to unpack the latest, we're joined by Elon Inc. regular Dana Hull. Hi, Dana.
Hey, Joel.
And a special guest, and now friend of the podcast, McKenna Kelly from Wired Magazine. Hello, McKenna.
It's good to be back. Hey.
Okay, I'm going to start with a clip from October 2024 at Madison Square Garden, where Elon is on stage with Howard Lutnick at a Trump rally.
I've only got one question for you, and then I'm getting out of here because this is your stage. But we set up Doge.
Yes.
How much do you think we can rip out of this wasted $6.5 trillion Harris-Biden budget?
Well, I think we can do at least $2 trillion.
Yeah!
Yes.
$2 trillion.
And now, here's Elon just a few days ago with a new number.
I'm excited to announce that we anticipate savings in FY26 from reduction of waste and fraud by $150 billion.
McKenna, we had $2 trillion. Now it's $150 billion, dramatically smaller. How realistic is even that number?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the kinds of areas that Doge is targeting right now, one of the biggest cost savings I think you can argue is all of these layoffs and rifts that have been happening across the federal government. But at a lot of agencies, the workforce is one of the cheapest parts of these agencies, right? And so, again, it's hard to predict, right, if 150 billion will actually be the number, or if it'll be even less. It's hard to even just trust Elon's goals here, because even when we go to like doge.gov, where all of these savings are supposed to be listed, a lot of these end up being incorrect and even removed from the website. So even if he claims to have met 150 billion, say like 6 months from now, I have a hard time believing that that number would even be accurate.
And Dana, how active, I know this is an ongoing current on the show, how active is Doge currently? Feels like it's winded down a little bit.
I think I'm going to push back on that. I think that people think it's winded down because everyone is focused on tariffs and what tariffs are doing to the economy. But Doge is still very much embedded in all of these agencies. You know, Antonio Gracias, one of Elon's best friends who's on the board of SpaceX, is like at the Social Security Administration. They're doing all of this stuff with Social Security and immigration and putting people on these dead lists. And I just think that just because there's not maybe the wall-to-wall media coverage that there was in Doge's earliest days does not mean that Doge is winding down. Elon's time as a special government employee will sunset after the 130-day mark. But like Doge is very much embedded in all of these agencies. And what McKenna has written about a lot is, and what we've seen too, is like, you know, it's not just this like band of kids that like got a lot of publicity in the early days. People are now in CIO roles. People have access to wide swaths of information. And so I just think it's incorrect to sort of act like Doge is sort of on the way out. It is not. Like, they have more access to more databases and more agency functions than ever. And there's like, you know, easily, I don't know, I think our internal list is over 80 people, but there are people like at every agency accessing all kinds of data, and they're still doing a lot of work like hand in hand with OMB and the Trump administration.
I also think part of what's happening here, too, and a lot from my reporting and the reporting that you guys have been doing at Bloomberg, is that at the beginning, there were these stories of these teenage strike forces of engineers descending on these agencies. And then also, it was every single agency. And now, the way that I've been describing this to folks that I've been speaking with recently is that we're kind of exiting this stage 1 of Doge, right? And entering what I've been kind of calling stage 2, although I don't have a proper definition for it yet, because I don't think we're in it all the way. But a lot of what's happening at agencies, specifically I'm thinking about the IRS, it's tax day. There's a lot of very technical things happening. Groups of engineers, at the IRS and groups of Doge folks and Palantir coming in and trying to build these unified API layers. That doesn't really make a great headline. And then you also have to think, does your audience, even understand fully what all of this means? And so there's a lot going on, right? But it's not this headline grabbing, attention grabbing, teenagers storming through the State Department, right? Instead, they're sitting at computers at hackathons.
I feel like we've gone from feeding USAID into the wood chipper on a Saturday to let's remake technical infrastructure of how this agency actually operates and strip out all of the legacy software contracts and make a new database that is run by a private enterprise.
And McKenna, tell us more about your reporting on this, because you have written about specifically at the IRS and this API that you mentioned, and Palantir. Palantir, of course, private company that's legendary for being able to create layers of software that can kind of reach across databases. What is the end goal here, and what could this end up looking like?
Yeah, it's really hard to predict what the end goal is. But what's happening at the IRS specifically is that Doge, specifically the Doge lead at IRS, his name is Sam Korkos, he wants to build this unified API layer across all of the IRS systems, basically creating one cloud platform using Palantir Foundry software, right, to be able to create different apps to run LLMs over IRS data. And he thinks he can do this in 30 days. This is happening at other agencies as well. A couple weeks ago, I reported that at the Social Security Administration, for example, there were Doge folks who wanted to completely rebuild the SSA code base. And again, they think that they can do this in 30 days or a month. Completely build it up from the ground up and removing all of this legacy code, whether that is assembly or COBOL, and get it ready for whatever, this next phase of Doge is.
And Dana, when you think about what that looks like and how it's currently used in tech, what do you think it could end up looking like?
Well, I think that there's just a lot of great privacy concerns because the federal government always had really strict rules about who had access to what, and the inability to kind of cross agencies was sort of by design, right? Because the federal government took very seriously the privacy of American citizens. But if databases can talk to each other, there's nothing that's stopping Doge from using IRS data to coordinate with with ICE or the student loan program. And that is the big fear of a lot of civil rights experts and student groups. And you're seeing in a lot of the lawsuits that have been filed, great concern about the lack of privacy controls that are going into these new systems. And, Musk is very focused on immigration, and they are talking a lot about Social Security and what they're doing with Social Security and how so many immigrants have Social Security numbers. And so I think that there's just great concern about the lack of privacy controls as these new databases are being built and cross-referenced across the government. You can argue that doing that is more efficient and will help find waste and fraud. But on the flip side, the government now has unfettered more and more access to everyone's information than it ever had before.
McKenna, where else has your reporting on Doge taken you here? We've got the IRS stuff. We've got HHS. The Palantir stuff is really interesting. What's the signal through all of this, especially as, we start to look forward to perhaps Elon maybe stepping back a little bit at the end of his 130 days as a special government employee?
Yeah, to piggyback off of what Dana was saying, that's the fear right now, is that one of the administration's biggest goals right now is immigration and immigration reform, if that's what you want to call disappearing people, immigration reform. But if you look at the agencies that Doge has targeted, you mentioned HHS, which has a database of unaccompanied minors. You look at IRS, despite as much as what Elon wants to say, immigrants in our country do pay taxes in a variety of ways, billions and billions of dollars every year. And then SSA as well, they end up paying into Social Security as well. And so when you look at the agencies that Doge has targeted, with the priority of the administration being immigration, by building these APIs and modernizing these systems, allowing them to talk would make it a lot easier. And with sources that I've been speaking to, the fear is, building this gigantic migrant surveillance system. And the scariest part of this to me is the idea that you can do this in 30 days. I mean, just identifying where all the databases are, what they do, who accesses them, and for what purpose would take longer than 30 days, according to everyone that I've spoken to. And so even if you want to, even beyond that 30-day limit, is there even time to test how these were built? Are things going to go wrong? I think the big thing, too, is who is going to get trapped in this? We had over the weekend an immigration lawyer in Massachusetts, right, who received an email saying that she needed to self-deport immediately. That was a mistake. There's just so many mistakes that could happen. And when the administration is sending so many of these folks down to the CCOP prison in El Salvador and not really fighting to bring them back when mistakes are made, that adds another layer to this all, right? Because maybe they don't even care if, the system is 100% perfect and doesn't make these horrible mistakes.
Dana, that is all kind of scary. We're starting to think about, what a complete kind of surveillance state might look like here in the U.S. It's also, I'm curious, I mentioned how Elon could be stepping away here at the end of a 130-day period. He will have this special government employee status that will sort of supposedly end. Is he actually going to leave?
So the White House has discretion in terms of how the 130 days are counted. Like if you think if the inauguration on January 20th was day one, then the 130 days brings you till roughly the end of May. I mean, there have definitely been signals that Elon is going to sort of step back. Trump has said basically at some point Elon's going to have to leave. Elon talked very publicly at that Wisconsin rally about the sort of hit that he's taking in terms of the backlash against Tesla and how that's impacted his stock and the stock of everyone who owns Tesla, frankly. And so there is a sense that he might pull back, but I think that he has unfettered access to the Trump administration. And we have to remind everyone that he bankrolled this electoral comeback. He spent more than $250 million to get Trump reelected. He campaigned for Trump all across Pennsylvania. And he's not just going to take his ball and go back to Tesla. He funded this campaign for a reason. I think he is very proud of what Doge has accomplished, but frustrated that the public isn't giving him accolades. He is frustrated by the backlash. His companies are Tesla at least is in trouble. They have a stale lineup. BYD is starting to eat their lunch globally. The Cybertruck is a disaster in terms of sales. So at some point he's going to have to reckon with what is his company. But I don't think he's going to not be in touch with Trump. I mean, the two of them text each other all the time.
The thing I would add to that, too, is that he owns X, Twitter. I mean, his formal role is as a senior advisor. I think maybe you can just do that by tweeting, unfortunately, as well. Because it's very clear, that the administration, Republican influencers, everyone in this ecosystem, this Trump administration ecosystem is on there and probably, gets push notifications like we all do when Elon Musk tweets, whether we turn them on or not.
McKenna, that's an interesting idea. And it does speak to maybe what the future looks like, but back just in the present, since he's still in Doge, how involved is he on a day-to-day basis based on what you've learned through your reporting?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the way that he operates with a ton of his companies, right? He has these grand ideas or whatever, and he builds a group of people who he knows can execute. Steve Davis seems to be heavily involved, who, is now the president of the Boring Company. He was brought in for the Twitter acquisition and did a lot of the cost cutting there. It seems like it's the same playbook, right? And then it gives Elon a lot of time to go, do some of his company stuff, play Diablo 4 at 3:00 in the morning to test his Starlink or whatever. But yeah, I think it's still, him operating as this philosopher king more than this everyday role of getting his hands dirty with firings or, doing specific stuff.
When I thought it was super interesting that Musk and a bunch of Doge people went on Fox News with Bret Baier to kind of talk about their work. And Steve Davis was sitting right next to Elon, and he was introduced by the Fox host as the COO.
Of Doge.
Of Doge, yeah. So to McKenna's point, like, it is Elon's philosophy, but he has kind of deputized some of his most loyal lieutenants to actually carry out the work. But Musk is still very much in D.C. I mean, he was with Trump in Florida over the weekend at the UFC fight. Like, he is not in Fremont. He is still very much in the nation's capital.
So when he's not there, let's say after these 130 days or whatever, who are some of the key people? You mentioned Steve Davis. Who are some of the key people in Doge that will be kind of primary reporting targets as you kind of look ahead? Dana, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting to look at who's taken on the CIO role. So at Social Security, for instance, the sort of interim CIO was this guy Mike Russo, but now it's Scott Coulter, who's like a young kind of private equity VC kind of person who is now like in that job. And so that's like one example of like an agency person that I would look closely at. I think it's super interesting to see how long Antonio Gracias, who's on the board of SpaceX, and Joe Gebbia, who's on the board of Tesla, stay involved in Doge. They have both been very active. Antonio at Social Security and Gebbia is like at OPM looking at the retirement system. You know, some of these people kind of cycled through and have cycled back to their companies already. Like some of the young like engineers who worked at Tesla and SpaceX are already sort of done with their work and are now back at the companies. But to McKenna's point, like as we enter sort of Doge 2.0 or like the second phase, I think it's going to be some of the lesser known names that will actually have the most influence. And they're lesser known by design. I mean, a lot of what we know about these people is based on court filings and TROs and declarations from the government in these various lawsuits. A lot of these people have scrubbed their social media. They don't have a LinkedIn page. Like they are being very like low key on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And worth mentioning, Dana, you worked with Sophie Alexander and our graphics team here at Bloomberg to sort of map out what that universe of people really look like that will be kind of leading Doge potentially forward after Elon steps aside.
Yeah, for sure.
McKenna, any particular names that we haven't mentioned yet that are of interest to you?
Yeah, the people that I'm most interested in are the Doge people who are within that USDS system, which was formerly, of course, called US Digital Services, created under Obama to resolve the whole healthcare.gov debacle, now called the US Doge Services, seemingly led by a woman named Amy Gleason, who you don't hear a lot from. So I'm definitely interested in seeing what Amy's role evolves into. Does she end up making more decisions? Does she take the reins on a lot of this? I have my doubts, of course, but definitely the leadership there and at GSA as well, because the General Services Administration to me has kind of seemed, with all the layoffs happening and getting rid of so many folks at these agencies, it seems like they're building like this group of technologists that they can then just like deploy anywhere to, you know, quote unquote, like fix issues or do things.
All right, McKenna, we're going to have you back on the pod. Thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate you and your time.
Great to be here.
Okay, now we're going to talk about the other most exciting thing in the world, which is Tesla as a stock. And we're going to be joined by Esha Day, a Bloomberg stocks reporter. Esha, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Dana, you're still here?
Of course.
Esha, what is going on with this stock right now?
Well, that's an interesting question. As always, it's very volatile and it's mostly going down. Now, you would say that about the U.S. stock market as well now, right?
And for the numbers, like about 7.5% down for the S&P so far this year.
I just want to set up yes, Tesla is moving a lot like the U.S. stock market, which itself is moving like a meme stock these days. But I want to tell you how much wilder Tesla is. For example, Tesla shares are down, last I checked, about 38% this year. S&P 500 is down about 8% over that time. The NASDAQ 100, which is, I would say, usually a little more volatile than the S&P 500 index because it's so technology heavy, is down about 10%. So, that's the comparison. Now, since April 2nd, when this recent tariff turmoil really started, and by many accounts, some people would say that Tesla is relatively insulated maybe from some of the tariffs, yet Tesla shares are down about 11% since April 2nd's close. S&P 500 is down about 4.5% over that time. NASDAQ 100 down 4%. So, by whichever way you look at this, Tesla shares are doing very badly.
Okay, there's this thing called a death cross that's come up a little bit, and Tesla seems to be maybe flirting with it. How significant is this death cross talk?
Yeah, it's significant for sure. A death cross is basically a chart pattern, but it's one of the more prominent ones out there, something that technical analysts and chart analysts kind of look at very closely. Now, any chart pattern, we would not look at them in isolation. We usually want to see what else is happening with the stock at the same point. But overall, what this death cross is it's basically giving you a sense of what the momentum of the share price is doing, right? So the way it's defined is when a short-term price support line of a stock or an asset falls below the long-term support line or trend line. The way it's usually defined is by the 50-day moving average and the 200-day moving average. And Tesla shares just crossed that kind of ominous milestone yesterday. What it usually means is that, the momentum is now on the lower side. The last time it happened was in late January, early February in 2024. And right after that happened, Tesla shares fell about 25% over 55 trading sessions. So, that's how it goes.
Okay. Dana, I'm going to turn to you. What's the word among investors and analysts? We're a week away from earnings here. It seems like a pretty significant earnings. So what are we hearing as we march towards that day?
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of analysts cutting their price targets for volume because Tesla just does not really have a robust lineup. And people want to hear, what is up with, is Tesla ever going to make a cheaper car? Is the cheaper car, really a new car? Or is it just a decontented Model 3 and Model Y? I've written about this, that, Elon Musk is basically bored with making cars. He kind of proved to the world that you could make a high-performance electric car, and he accomplished that. And now he's all about AI and the robotaxi. The company is supposed to launch some kind of soft robotaxi service in Austin in June. So I think the earnings call is all going to be about, the catalysts for the future. Everyone knows it was a really bad quarter in terms of sales. How testy analysts get with Elon on the call, I think, will be interesting. I'm hoping that analysts will ask him, when are you stepping back from Doge? When are you going to actually run the company? He has always been a part-time CEO, and I think you're really seeing frustration about that spillover. Dan Ives, who's, always been one of the most bullish analysts on Wall Street, sort of talked about the brand destruction and that, Elon has to kind of make a decision and read the room. So, yeah, it'll be a very interesting call next week.
Dana just brought up Dan Ives, who, as she also mentioned, has been a huge Tesla bull. How significant was him changing his tune a little bit, Asha?
So Dan Ives, I would say, is one of the strongest bullish voices among sell-side analysts on Tesla. He's very rarely criticizes the stock or Elon Musk himself. So him coming out was really kind of emblematic of how a lot of the bullish voices, and I speak to investors, both retail investors and institutional investors on Tesla all the time. And around the time when Dan kind of came out and said that, okay, this is time for the company to really kind of, listen to the room, really, and for Elon Musk to take a step back and kind of refocus on the company again, that was really emblematic of the mood of the street. When I talk to investors, that they're very cautious. There's this thing about Tesla bullish investors where they're almost always optimistic in some way, but the mood of caution, the mood of concern is really coming out right now. And that is becoming really intense after the first quarter delivery numbers and the results that we are expecting next week.
Okay, so there's caution, but then there's shorts. No one seems to be willing to short it, though, right? And Dana, you've written about shorts and how devastated they've been by this stock. So even though there's caution, is anybody really willing to bet against Elon?
That's a really good question. The sort of group of short sellers known as Tesla Q really got blown out of the water when the Model Y became the best-selling vehicle, and the company kind of very deftly navigated the pandemic and hit $1 trillion valuation. I actually don't know if the shorts have come back. Some of the biggest and loudest short sellers like David Einhorn and Jim Chanos, I don't actually know if they still are actively shorting stocks. Like, Esha, I haven't caught up with them recently. Have you?
No, you're right. I mean, there are almost no prominent bearish voices or short seller voices to be found in Tesla at this point. And, they kind of absolutely got blown apart during the 2020-2021 rally in the stock. So again, numbers a little bit for context. There was a time, I would say around 2018, 2019, the short seller percentage of Tesla stock was around 33% of its free float. Right now, it's hovering around 3% for the past 4 or 5 years. So that's where we are. Even when we see a slight bit of uptick in the stock, we haven't really seen anything that's, worth really noting. When I talk to people on the street, there are enough people out there who think this stock should be shorted, but they're just not willing to stand in front of it just because it's such an immense beast of a momentum stock, right? Just when the stock turns, it's very hard to tell when it might turn, and especially with Elon's political prominence and everything, the understanding is that once a stock really turns, it's very hard to stand in front of that momentum, and nobody wants to get kind of blown apart by that.
Esha, Dana, thanks for joining us on Elon Inc.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
This episode was produced by Stacey Wong. Anna Mazarakis is our editor, and Rehan Harmanchi, our senior editor. The idea for this very show also came from Rehan, and she deserves a special shout-out since this will be her final episode. Blake Maples handles engineering, and David Purcell fact-checks. Our supervising producer is Magnus Henriksen. The Elon Inc. theme is written and performed by Taka Yasuzawa and Alex Sugiura. Brendan Francis Noonan is our executive producer, and Sage Bauman is the head of Bloomberg Podcasts. A big thanks to our supporter, Brad Stone. I'm Joel Weber. If you have a minute, rate and review our show. It'll help other listeners find us. See you next week.